Do you want to do intros?
I'm gonna have like a
Do it. It's not that. It's basically, hello, this is TLS. All right. We're going to get started here. This is the TLS session. Welcome. If you're in the wrong place, then better find the right room. Do you have the, I can use this thing. All right, so IETF 122 here in Bangkok. You probably have seen the note well here that describes the proper processes and behavior at the IETF in terms of IPR and anti-harassment and other topics. If you're not familiar with this, I suggest you go look at the references here. They are important. Please also note that there is a code of conduct to treat each other professionally and respectfully in these meetings and in the discussions. And this note really well describes some of your options if you feel that there have been problems with harassment. Please, if you're remote, keep your mic and audio off. If you're in the room, please join the meeting with the on-site tool. That's how we will manage the microphone queue and manage attendance. So thanks for that. I think we already have a note taker. Thank you. And let's see. So yeah, this is just the agenda. If there are no, we have two sessions this IETF, one today and one on Thursday. If there are, for today, we'll go over the status of some of the drafts and then discuss some of the fact processes that have been going on. And that's kind of the plan for today. And then on Thursday, we have discussion of trust anchors and some discussion of PAICS, not PAICS, but PAICS, and then ECH, request MTLS flag, and an identity crisis in attested TLS. Are there any agenda bashes for today's agenda? Okay.
Sorry, I didn't thank you quickly. If I could, yeah, I wanted to say something on Martin's draft. I thought that was going to be on Thursday, though. I can submit slides now. 1 second.
Okay. All right.
Now we go on to the chair monologue for a little while. Hey, Jonathan, sorry, I missed that. I thought Martin sent me slides and I thought it was just from him. So if you send stuff, we can kind of merge them all together. All right, so the first thing is, as you may have noticed, you're getting spammed on the first of the month from me about, frequently asked questions. We updated it because we had some input from others about making sure that we listen to other viewpoints. So it's not just the web. Obviously, PRs are welcome. So I want to thank Rich for taking the time to read it and providing some input. So feel free to read that and put in PRs. And it's going to keep coming monthly for a while till we get a sense that we've kind of turned the corner here. And the other one is this mailless moderation stuff. It's another monthly reminder of just keep it professional. We're going to do some contentious calls, probably consensus call, working group adoption calls. And so we want to make sure that everybody kind of keeps it professional. I would ask an open-ended question like, how's it going? But no one here is bashful and obviously tells us what they think about this. And so we've not been told it's a horrible idea. So, okay. So the next thing is the FAT. Everybody wants to know what's going on. We're going to talk about that more in a second, but I did want to let you know that there is a queue. We have one that is being worked on now, RFC 8773 BIS. The queue is being filled by the documents that have gone through working group last call or have been recently adopted. So the DTLS RRC draft, return routability check. That one has been sent to the FAT now, so it's out for review. The PKCS one, which is adding, signatures back in for, because everybody uses it apparently still, I think will go fairly easy. So we're also going to send that one forward. And then the other ones, some of them might touch the key schedule, and that'll be exciting. And then we'll get to DTLS. That's where the fun starts. So that's just kind of a heads up. The next thing is ECH. It is out the door. It's an IETF last call. We're almost there. And then, of course, other people showed up with other things they wanted to do. So I put up here the directorate views and the IETF process when it goes out for the for IETF last call. There's a bunch of various reviews that happen. And the one I was most worried about was the DNS STIR one, but we've been talking with them for so long. They're basically like, good to go. So Ecker and company are going to need to address those. But basically, it looks like at this point, we're kind of marching ahead. Again, modulo what gets said on Thursday. And the SCVB ECH draft has also got a DNS STIR review, and they said it's ready to go. And I suspect that the other ones, since that one's very much DNS heavy, I think it'll be pretty easy to get out the door. So that'll be great. I've been working on that for like 15 years. All right, so the next thing is RFC 8446 BIS and 8447 BIS. You might be like, well, the draft is on. Why haven't it moved forward? Paul basically said you can do ECH first, or you can do this other one. And so we decided to push the ECH one first, and we expect that the last calls will happen for the IETF last calls will happen for the 8446 and 8447 BIS very shortly after the IETF meeting this time, which is great. So we've got some comments along the way, and we're starting to address them. So Joe and I are going through that. All right, PQ related drafts, because everybody loves to talk about PQ. This is what we sent on the mailing list in case you don't want to read the fire hose. The gist is that we are going to run some adoption calls. We had a kind of a quiz in December that kind of bled into January about like what were we going to do and should we do this, and basically everybody said yeah, that former consensus that we had to not do algorithm specifications or cipher suite specifications in TLS, that game has changed. So we have a list of drafts there. They're the ones that were out there, and we're going to do a consensus call just kind of like one through the other. Now, if you're curious about the order, basically the idea is everybody's most concerned about, encrypt now or decrypt now, harvest. What is it? Harvest now, decrypt later. Yeah, I got to come up with a better acronym. And so the idea is that we put those at the top. The one that's actually implemented quite widely is in the first draft. So we're going to go out the door. Then we're going to do the hybrid one, and then we're going to do MLDSA, SLHDSA, and composite MLDSA. I suspect this list will grow, and it's just going to go on the bottom, and we're going to keep going through it. So we'll see what happens. And just a big reminder, we are not picking the mandatory to implement, so we don't need to have that fight. We can have that later. All of these drafts are at this point informational, and we're just going to kind of keep going, trying to go to get them in the document, in the documents in the working group, so that we can discuss them, and we'll go from there. Okay, great. Other IDs that are in the process. So deprecate obsolete kex has been out the door, ready to go for a while, but Paul rightly said, hey, it's pinned on 8447 BIS. So when you get that one done, I'll work on the other one. So luckily when 8447 goes out, the obsolete kex draft will go too. So that'll be out the door. Hybrid design, we pushed it for pubrec. So Paul's it's in his bucket waiting for him when he gets some time to give a review so we can get that one out the door. The weird one is this keylog file draft. So we had, the history of this draft was that we had a lot of support to adopt the first version, which is basically what Mozilla had specified. It is used quite widely. And then we had this other one that came along and said, hey, well, if we're doing ECH, we kind of need the same thing. And it had an IANA registry, so people could put things in there. And there were these two drafts. And the one went through, the first one, the keylog file, went through fine, got through, was out the door. Basically in the RC editor's queue. And then when we were doing ECH keylog, Rich basically said, hey, we should slam these two together. And people were like, nah, it sounds like a good plan. So we yanked them back. So we yanked it back, and Martin and Yaroslav and Hannes, I guess, slammed the two drafts together. And we had one, and we did a second last call. And it's completed. And we're basically at the point now where we need to progress it. And we're going to do that. I think we're going to try to use the tool here, show of hands tool, to see if there's anybody that's really like violently against it. So have you got the thing ready to go?
I have a thing here that says Do you object to do you object to moving forward with the publication of the SSL keylog draft?
So John, just a minor correction on your history. The keylog file first came as an AD sponsored, and then when there was a little wider interest, it went to the working group.
Yep. Okay. I see Stephen is in the queue.
Hi. So I'm not clear what the proposal is here. I mean, there was kind of an extended discussion of this second working group last call. Some of the points made were that parts of this document are worse than others. Are you proposing to just say this is a yes/no decision, or are the chairs going to actually evaluate some of the mails in the working group last call and respond to those?
So Stephen, we're in this weird bucket, right? Where both documents got at the door. We brought it back and put it together, and then people said no. So we're in this weird position where we're trying to make sure that we're going to move this thing forward. So.
But you're proposing to move it forward in a binary manner. So it's either the entire thing, including the ionic considerations, making it extensible.
Yes, we're proposing putting the document forward as is.
Okay, so in my opinion, that doesn't seem very responsive to a bunch of the messages in the working group last call. The second one, that's my opinion.
All right, so let's go ahead and kick off our call. Give it another minute. All right, I think we're stabilizing here. All right, we are not going to progress the document. So let's go ahead. Oh, do you object? Oh, sorry, I read it wrong. I need new glasses, clearly. This is, oh, so we are going to progress it. Okay.
All right.
All right. Okay. Yeah, if anybody that doesn't want it to go forward, feel free to get to the microphone and or get in the queue. I know Stephen. Hi, Stephen.
Hi. So I think the result was like 19 people wanted to go forward and 4 said they were objected, right?
Yeah, that was the number that I saw with my glasses. So hopefully that was the number.
Okay. So I mean, again, I think the objections I think have been raised on the list and not responded to, which was, for example, that this creates a kind of an extensible way for a designated expert to add new ways to leak keys. I don't think there was a substantive response to that, other than a few other people expressing similar concerns. So I don't think the working group last call included responses to the points raised.
Okay.
Rich Salzak, I did respond to people who said it was a concern, and I pointed out existing flaws in some other open source software, and that this is useful, and it's not going to cause, in my opinion, not going to cause key leaks. So there was discussion that was more than just, we don't like it, or there was discussion on both sides.
Okay. All right. We'll get that started soon. Thank you. Next. That went a lot faster than I thought it was going to. All right. I guess Britt is up next.
All right, so we have the FAT report for 8773 BIS here. Since it's a fairly new process, so to speak, I'm going to run through not just the report itself, but then what we did. And I'll start with that, so everyone has a full context on this, and then go through the actual report. Next slide.
I gave you the power, so you should be able to draw the slides yourself.
I have the power. That's awesome. How do I use the power?
Yeah, you gotta find the arrow somewhere on your screen.
No such arrow.
Here, let's see.
I hand the power back. Oh, now I have arrows. That's awesome. Okay, so now I have power. Okay, so quick recap. What is this about? The short, very, very short version of this draft is that by using PSKs and TLS, we can achieve quantum resilience, at least against harvest now, decrypt later. And this includes an introduction of PSKs in early data. So obviously a lot more. That's a very short version of this. Was there a question? There seems to be a limited mic or something. Okay, proceeding. So before going on, context on what this report is or what the team is doing here. So with the FAT, we are talking to other external reviewers, and this report is meant to give insight to the working group. This does not replace a working group decision. All of you guys will still have to prime your mics, come up and discuss afterward. So all of that's still on you, but this is an external review of that draft with recommendations by people who've done analysis on TLS. So that's short version. Okay, so what did we do? I'm going to start again with process here. We went and requested reviews from researchers who have worked in this topic area. And when I say in this topic area, it's not simply within TLS. Most of this also was focused on people who've done analyses using PSK modes in TLS. And that includes both people who've worked on computational analysis as well as symbolic analysis. So in other words, hitting a spread spectrum here. And we have some names listed here. So there were more reviewers asked, but this is the subset who were available and willing to review. And some of those are obviously IETFers. Some of those are not IETFers. So got actually very good responses. 4 people responded and gave very extensive reviews and feedback, which was excellent. What the report is. So there's various forms that we could take it with a report. What I chose to do with this is to aggregate the comments as directly as possible. So you already have the names of who reviewed. The reason I put those names there and the reviewers were asked if we could share them is for full transparency. So you can go ahead and look up yourselves what work they have done in this field and what they have published. So you know context is this isn't just any cryptographer being asked, it's people who've done work in this area. We've taken their comments into the report. These are quoted as directly as possible. So in most cases, that is a direct quote. In some cases, the input was informal enough that it was paraphrased and to add clarity. But if it's paraphrased, I have also denoted in the report which things were paraphrased. So you know what's a direct quote and what is paraphrased. All that said, there is a goal of semi-anonymity here. So you know the names of the reviewers, but not who said what. And part of this is that we are asking a lot of these academics who normally would not provide any quote whatsoever until the work is published. So they don't want to necessarily go on record with an informal statement that they haven't done a full analysis on. So in order to get that informal input, we aren't attributing quotes to any one person. And this also applies to the aggregate report. So after taking all of those inputs and creating the report, I have not yet, or have not, and do not intend to send the report again back to the reviewers. And there's 2 reasons for that. One is to limit overhead burden on them. They are, again, not necessarily IETFers. They had no stake in this game whatsoever, and this is purely voluntary time on their end to be willing to help out informally. And they're not even getting recognition from being on a program committee for this. So trying to limit that overhead for them, but also to protect that anonymity so that they are not being asked for concurrence on the final version of all of this. So they do not need to concur with what other people said as direct quotes and so forth. So again, no one's being quoted here, but you know who has reviewed the draft. As a big reminder statement, please do not contact the reviewers directly. So not all of them are IETFers. They have all been invited to join in these discussions. They have all been welcome to participate further if they so choose, in which case they're probably in the room. If they're not, and not standing up to the mic, do not contact them. Our ability in the IETF to get such voluntary reviews is highly contingent on everyone keeping them out of the further discussions we normally have in the IETF. So big statement right there. If you do have questions or comments, please come to me. At the last IETF, there was a request for volunteers to help with this process, and I most generously was volunteered. So I get to be your point person here, and if you have comments, I will help out with that. But we do try to keep the reviewers out of any direct discussion. All right, so that's context. Let's get into the big picture summary on this. The good news is basically all the reviewers were in consensus, even though they did not know what each other were saying going into it. They were all basically had very similar comments and review statements. So that's great. There was not conflict, even among different analysis approaches. Everyone had very similar views. Positive outcomes. The draft is unlikely to introduce vulnerabilities to traditional TLS. So in other words, if we use this PSK modification, it is unlikely to have any need for analysis as far as implications for TLS as you use it today against a traditional attacker. However, the traditional attacker is not the one that is described in the draft. In the draft, it says the motivation is protection from a quantum attacker. And this is where some concerns were raised. So the more severe concerns here were about that quantum resilience. And I will roughly summarize, I'll say generally 5 themes of this. Again, you can look in the report to see exactly what was said, but there are generally 5 themes. 1, that the claims about authenticity from this PSK were not substantiated. It's difficult to say how the authentication of the users will be under a quantum attacker. The claims about quantum resilience were also not substantiated given the lack of our understanding of how that PSK is generated. The draft said a strong PSK, but for example, could a PSK coming from another traditional base session suffice? And that wasn't clear. The third concern here was about the security guarantees for TLS security. The draft explicitly allows PSK reuse, and under a quantum attacker, you are assuming that your traditional TLS is handshake or ECDSH type things. That's all gone as far as your security reliance on it. And therefore, it's more or less reliant on that PSK security. And since now you have PSK reuse across multiple sessions, you're not really getting quite TLS security, and you have a lack of key separation, etc. Similarly, there was concerns under that quantum attacker since PSKs are allowed for group use. So it is explicitly allowed that PSK can be owned by multiple parties. And so again, it's not clear that you're really getting TLS security from this. So there seems to be some security, but what exactly that is, there's questions about a need for analysis. And then the last point here is that there were questions about, is this meant to be some type of hybrid form of security, and clarification on, if so, what form. Okay, so this was the general output of the report. We had a couple recommendations here of possible courses of action. The idea being that with that, we can help facilitate with the author if possible any revisions that might alleviate those reviewer concerns to speed things along. So one option was to reduce or remove the motivation on security claims, particularly with that quantum attacker, because all these issues with PSK reuse comes down to that scenario. Whereas if you're talking only traditional attackers, then the PSK reuse isn't a problem because you already have that key separation, etc., coming from the TLS handshake. The alternative here is keep the security claims in current motivation and get a analysis, which then can be aligned for the security consideration sections. So those were two possible course of actions that were proposed. But again, it comes down to the working group decision. This is just a recommendation. And in all cases, it was recommended that there's more clarity on PSK provenance and reuse restrictions and so forth, and what's going to happen with downgrades so that we understand how and where that PSK is being used in the context. So that was the feedback that was given. And Russ took some measures on revisions here. So particularly looking at that authenticity claims and PSK provenance. So going back to this list of issues, this next draft that is in front of you now has, at least to the view on the FAT side, been addressed. So there's the claims on authenticity under quantum attacker have been removed, and it's been more stated clearly that you are reliant on the authentication provided by TLS. The PSKs are not meant to provide that, as well as a clearer statement on the need for that generation and provisioning of the PSK in order to get these security claims. That still leaves these 3 items on the to-do list. The 5th one is, it can be clarified. I don't think it is quite as critical as far as what type of hybrid this is going for. But the 2 there in blue are critical items about whether, how the PSK can be reused or used across groups, and then claims for TLS security under a quantum attack are being provided by that. So in this case, the author, Russ, preferred to keep the key reuse, the PSK reuse, and group use there, which begs the question of course, what to do next. And that really comes down to, again, working group decisions. So here's a little bit more detail on those, which I've included just as a reference point. So those 2, again, was recommended to pull that back so that we're not saying TLS security, or more concretely that we restrict that key reuse. Given that the preference, at least on the author side, was to keep this variable with the PSK, it was recommended that we look at getting an analysis. So then the claims in the security section can be directly related to what that analysis output and modeling states. So those are the possible courses of action that we left up on at the top, and this is where we are at the end. And at that, we'll go over to the working group. And if you have questions on the process or on the recommendations, feel free to ask. Otherwise, you're welcome to get out the boxing gloves and discuss the draft and what to do about it.
All right. So I think, thank you, Britta. What we can do now is have, I think there are, as outlined, there are kind of 3 sort of broad categories of options to move forward here. One is the working group can decide to publish the document as is. Another is the working group could decide to revise the draft to either reduce the security claims and or remove protocol options, or some sort of draft revision. And another option is, should the working group could keep the document as is and wait for formal analysis. So these are kind of, I think, 3 different options there. Russ?
So thank you, Britta. That was as factual as possible. So I appreciate the way that was presented. At this stage, I think we have the one thing that wasn't said is whether you think the security considerations adequately document the way the protocol actually works. I think it does, and it talks about the if you use group keys, what the consequences are in order to get the what you called TLS security attributes or something like that. You would have to somehow get to pairwise PSK distribution mechanism. And I think that allowing both pairwise PSKs or group PSKs and documenting what you get and what you don't get is a more flexible way to move forward. And that's where we've reached at this point.
Ecker?
Yeah. Sorry, it's 2 a.m. for me, so I'm maybe not quite at my best here. Thanks, Russ. Thanks, Britta, for the really clear explanation of this situation. I think, I mean, having sort of listened to this, I think I'd like to raise a question which is like somewhat more substantive than process oriented, which is to say that in the environment where we have a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, as I think Britta points out here, basically it reduces to TLS PSK and has security properties of TLS PSK, which candidly are not great. Partly largely the limitations of like just PSKs in general, right? And so, you know, when this draft was first published, I think there was sort of a kind of belt and suspenders view about this, which is to say that, you know, that it provided security in a situation where we had no other options besides PSK in this case. But now the situation is quite different. And now the situation is that we have adopted, or I guess are about to adopt, a number of algorithms which, assuming things work correctly, have the same security and privacy properties as TLS. Even in the face of a quantum computer. And so I guess I'm sort of like not feeling that like jazzed about like having this be a proposed standard and us recommending this is something people really ought to do when actually what we want them to do is something different. And I mean, and no analysis will change that situation, right?
Okay. Russ, are you back in the queue?
So responding to Ecker, of course, we now have some algorithms that we did not have when this was first done. At the same time, we are seeing other working groups, one of which Joe chairs, surprisingly, are using this mechanism because they want the properties that they get with the PSK in the near term before the infrastructure is deployed to use these post-quantum algorithms. But yes, in the long run, we do want to get to the newer algorithms. And so the question is, has this adequately documented the security features you get if a quantum computer comes along and you're using the traditional public key and either a pairwise PSK or a group PSK? I think it does.
I mean, I guess that's one question. But imagine the security properties were you had no security at all, then we wouldn't make it a pro standard, right? I think that the threshold question is to adequately document them, but the substantive question is the TLS working group think the people ought to do this, and I guess I'm not like. I'm not saying I formed a complete opinion on this. I hadn't thought it through from this angle until Britta's presentation. So again, thank you. But I think that's the question we have to ask: is the opinion of the TLS working group that people ought to do this in addition to, or rather than doing post-quantum algorithms, or is the position that people ought to do post-quantum algorithms? and that I guess they could do this, but that's not really what we think they ought to do. So I think like making this proposed standard is like taking the position that actually this is like a thing that you ought to do, and that's something that we're going to actively decide, not just sort of be like, well, does it formally describe the situation?
Like, I guess for everybody else who might not be following along, this is already an RC. It's just experimental. So the whole point was to take it up to standard struct.
And also the background in EMU, this is used in an EAP method. It's not used as a protection against post-quantum, but rather to use a pre-shared key that was shared through another means out of band.
So it sounds like there's a couple
Yeah.
things being discussed here. One is what the working group wants to do on it, but then Russ has raised a question a couple times, and putting on the fat hat, I want to make sure that his question is answered regarding the guarantees in the security discussion section on the draft as it currently is. As far as there's a number of things that are covered, of course, in that security guarantee discussion. But the two ones I would say are still outstanding are about what the security of this is in terms of when you're using a group key, and particularly the key reuse, because this becomes the same key in the handshake as well as on the record layer and so forth. So normally we have a lot of key separation, and I think we probably need analysis before we could actually state clearly what those security guarantees are for those contexts. So it's not a issue necessarily that the draft is under aiming at the moment in that discussion, but it's simply not clear that we are actually stating those security guarantees.
Roberta, that's not correct. The same key is not used in the record layer and the handshake. The PSK only appears in the handshake.
It allows PSK reuse, and you can put the PSK across different sessions. So we are not getting key separation anymore.
Daniel?
Daniel Shu, ARKit. So question for Britta. Did the expert group have any recommendations about suitable tooling or an estimate for how long such validation might take?
Yes, so there's generally they recommended analysis with a net outcome, as you can see in the report. That was before particularly some edits that were aimed for. No one gave a precise timing. Some months seem to be the general thought of how long it would take. People were back and forth, like it would depend on their availability. It wouldn't take too long, maybe once they were able to get going and so forth. But probably, I'm going to guess around some months.
Hi, Ben Schwartz. I wonder, would the technical contents of the draft change on the basis of that analysis? Or would we just change the description of the properties under quantum analysis? Because it sounds like what I mean is a question for the working group. Like if this analysis came back and highlighted some interesting or significant issues related to quantum attack on this approach, would we change the protocol, or would we just document them in those deficiencies in the draft? Because it sounds like it might be the latter, right? It might be the case that this protocol is actually like in use in production and cannot meaningfully be changed in EMU for non-quantum related reasons. And if that's the case, then maybe the right path forward here is to basically rewrite the flavor text and say that, this is a protocol that exists for using PSKs in a particular way in a classical setting, which has utility. By the way, it has some interesting but not yet well analyzed quantum properties, but that's not the number one reason that we're doing this.
Ecker?
I mean, if this reveals deficiencies, they should be repaired. And I guess I'm sort of trying to figure out like what's at stake here. Like I think I elaborated what I think is at stake here, namely that is the IETF endorsing this mechanism, or are we just tolerating it? What's at stake here in terms of having it not be just stay experimental for the people who like it to be advanced?
That's the opportunity where the rest of the IETF can join in.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, I think I'm still trying to form my opinion on this topic because I say I try my thinking changed by Britta's comments here. But I'm trying to understand what is there some strong motivation why this needs to be per standard, or is it just like that people think experimental is yucky if you already use it? Because I would point out there's another status that indicates that we thought this over and we're not going to change it. That does not say we think this is great, and that's called informational. So it's not. So if people just think it's weird to have like experimental sitting there permanently, there's another option. So I'm just trying to figure out what's is there some reason I'm missing where this needs to be per standard, or is it just that that seems like natural to somebody?
So
that sounds like Russ would weigh in on.
Yeah. So in EMU, it's a down ref, which is not really that big of a deal, I don't think.
Right. So the people who are working in the EMU group asked me, why is this experimental? Can we make it standards track? So I initiated the work. And I do think the security considerations are greatly improved for compared to RFC 8773. If the group wants to proceed with informational, I'm fine with that.
I think that would be probably my preference given this discussion. I think another option would be trying to take the angle that that Joe indicated. Sorry, Ben indicated of a more clear applicability statement for saying what we think this is actually for. I think, as I say, my concern here is I'd like to leave people with a clear understanding of this TLS group's position on what you want to do to protect yourself against a quantum computer, and I think our position is that you want to do whatever post quantum chems we're adopting. If people think our position is we should use PSKs, that'd be an interesting discussion. And I think if there are people who really think that no, actually that they really don't trust the post quantum chems and that you should be using PSKs in a lot of settings, that would definitely be something we should have a discussion about. But if that's not people's position, I think we should make clear that does not document and the only people using this document are not using it primarily for quantum resistance, then probably we should not leave them the impression that's the point of the thing. And that's a recommendation. So I think that'd be the other option.
So this is something that's more on the chair side.
And I see you on the screen. Yeah, and I feel bad about that because I was not attempting to make you make the decision on that.
Yeah, no, but these are really good discussion points, just as general. So it sounds like maybe that's worth identifying whether or not this is something people are trying to really want to pursue for a standard, and then the if so, what to do about this FAT report.
Okay. So maybe what we want to do now is run a couple questions before the working group. Okay, the first one would be, do we want to publish this draft as is? Okay. Okay. We have another, trying to refine things here. See if we get more or less support. Should we publish the document as,
Before we go on, I was going to say it was 9 yes, 14 no, and 18 no opinions.
and the next question we'd like to ask is, should we publish the document as informational? Right now, we're asking for standard track.
Just to clarify, by publish, you mean without any changes?
Yeah, let's say without any changes.
Right, calling it. All right, we got more responses this time. It was, where is this one?
Do this one.
Working group as informational. 9 yeses, 19 nos, and 16 no opinions.
Next one. Next one, should the working group revise the security claims? Not saying it exactly how, but there's been a number of discussions here on how that could be done, and I think potential improvements that could be made.
All right, so that was 30 yeses, 1 no, and 4 no opinions.
Do we want to run this last one? Yeah. Okay, we have one more. Should the working group keep the document as is and wait for formal analysis? Is that what we want to say? Yeah.
I mean, not wait for commission.
All right, thank you.
Yes, so that one was 15 yeses, 18 nos, and 4 no opinions. We'll have to go discuss what all these questions mean and the answers. 5, sorry. Yes, 5, correct. Classes. So that's what we had scheduled for today. I did ask Jonathan to put together some slides for MTLS. Do you think you can do them in 10 minutes? Okay.
Honest in the room.
Hi, folks. Amazing. So I'm going to present request MTLS. It's very similar to what I presented last time, but hopefully with some more consensus in the room on what it is I'm actually after. We had a side meeting earlier this week to discuss this. Echo, are you already in the queue, or are you hanging? I'm on my first slide. Wait, yeah.
Though I do want you to formally change the name MTLS to something else because it kills me every time I hear it. But you know, maybe that's not within our power.
So I had bilateral TLS and was told that was wrong. Anyway, yes, whatever you want to call it, I don't care. Okay, many bots come from public clouds, and they try and distinguish themselves by saying user agent, web crawler. And turns out that that's not actually secure at all. And usually you'd want to say, I want to do mutual TLS, I want to do some kind of bilateral TLS, and we know who you are. But this doesn't work when you're talking about the web that is intended for humans. So if we're talking about, say, a web crawler that's trying to create a search index, then you're going to be trying to access the eyeball web. And if eyeballs get asked for certificates, then the browser doesn't like it for whatever reason. So I'm proposing that we have a TLS flag, a flag in the TLS flags extension that just says, I am configured with a certificate. And then the server can safely say, please give me a certificate. Why should we adopt this here? I've had, when I last presented this, said this is so obvious, let's just go and publish it AD sponsored or something. But it turns out lots of people seem to disagree about what this means. We've had lots of different discussions on use cases, and I really want TLS flags to happen. The other thing is, TLS flags are unary encoded, which means that the smaller your point number, the smaller your extension. And so if I'm doing this AD sponsored or whatever, I'm going to pick, 1 because I'm the most important. Okay, questions? I now have 3 working interoperable implementations. I have a spec. What do people want? Hi, Ben. Oh, yeah, Ben. David Ben.
Hi, David Ben, jump in.
Come in.
No, it's okay. David Ben is also
David Ben.
the useful name. What was I going to say? So I think a flag makes sense, but I think we should be clear about what this flag means, because it's not, I have a client certificate configured, because that is actually why the browser sending a, so it's not that when you send a certificate request to a browser, we just immediately go and prompt. It's that in order to evaluate the question, whether we have a client certificate configured, we often end up showing UI due to weird, messy platform things. Like once you get past the weird, messy platform things, when we see a certificate request whose CA extension does not match one of the available ones, like we won't prompt, because why would you bother prompting when there's no choice to provide to the user? So I think this flag is not, I have a certificate configured, because we can't, like it's not that clients would say yes or no to that, it's that clients can't evaluate it. It seems to me the flag that you actually want is, I will not barf if you give me an unsolicited certificate request, because I have resolved this mess of stuff that I will not bore you with here, but it is extremely tedious.
So my hope is that this never gets implemented by any browser. So we're sort of ignoring most of the browser stuff. I mean, it will potentially get implemented in sort of AI agent browsers maybe, but not like normal human people browsers. So hopefully this should never be an actual issue.
So if you want it to not be implemented in, so it sounds like the use case is bot auth, but for this to not be implemented in insert human client here, that would suggest that you have a bot auth flag, but you are presenting this not as a bot auth flag, but a request certificate request flag, and those are different things. This is this can be squared. You just change the sentence to say I will not barf on unsolicited certificate request, which is something that we can say of clients. And maybe there will be a browser that doesn't barf on unsolicited certificate requests, and they're very excited about client certs. Don't think that's very likely, but
So there is a case for this, which is browser isolation. So there are people who have remote browser product things. So, but I still don't consider that a human-driven browser. That's really a bot-driven browser.
Sure. I guess my point is that like the draft is not, at least as currently written, the I am a bot bit. It's the I want to
Right.
submit
So
request bit,
that's
we should
why
just, like, put
I
down the-
phrased it like you can't say I am a bot because it like when you're talking about like, oh, it's a remote browser.
We can probably take this offline. Like,
But yeah,
like
I think
semantics.
this is the kind of thing we should adopt this and just like have a short discussion on the mailing list and then publish it and like be done. Oh wow, there's a queue. Ben Schwartz. Let's go
Hey,
quick.
I don't get it. Help me. Like you have the user agent. It's telling you that this is a bot. So why then you know it's not a user. So you can send a certificate request. Why?
No, because you only get the user agent after the TLS connection is complete.
So yeah, I think that sounds like the problem worth solving, right? That like you're navigating around some origin, and at some point you come across an authenticated path in HTTP that wants to do client certificate authentication. We should be able to do that in the middle of a connection.
So there is post handshake auth, but it's
Yeah.
I don't like its security properties, and I don't think it's a good idea. But this is actually, we're not talking about this is an authenticated path. This is, I don't know, Googlebot is indexing the entire internet. It's not an authenticated path, it's just an ordinary path. But we want to be able to distinguish between, oh, this is actually Googlebot, and this is, oh, somebody has set up a machine in GCP and is pretending to be Googlebot.
Yeah, that sounds like authentication to me.
Exactly.
You're
It's an
authenticating.
authentication bit.
You're authenticating the request. You're authenticating the client identity. The client is claiming an
We're
identity
we're
via the
authenticating
user
the
agent,
client,
and you're
not the request. Right? This is per connection, not per request.
It is per request. It just happens to be implemented in this case using using connection level authentication. But that's an implementation detail. You could do this in HTTP using request level authentication if you wanted.
So I did start trying that, but it doesn't work because of connection pooling. And so that was part of the motivation I was thinking of for concealed auth in HTTP. But it doesn't work because every library I touched, you create the HTTP request, and then it goes to some pool, and you don't know which connection it's going to go on. And so you sign it, and like half the time it doesn't work. It's really grim.
Yeah. Anyway, there are lots of ways to. This is a request authentication problem. You're solving it via connection authentication. That's a fine way to solve it. But I don't really get why it needs to be done upfront in this way when it, why can't it be a challenge response?
Like you could
is
be
this
like,
super high? Is this a super high performance situation? These are largely, batch jobs where the
well,
round trip
if
is
I
not
said to Googlebot, actually every connection you have to create a connection and then tear it down and start a new one with auth, like, nah, double your costs.
Well, double your handshakes. Googlebot is reusing those connections extensively. And we all crawled on TCP before Quick, and a lot still do. So I don't know.
Okay. Anyway, we should adopt it and discuss it. Aka.
Yeah. So this is actually maybe it's a question for you. So your assumption is in the case of Googlebot, they're going to offer their web PKI server certificate. What are they going to offer?
They're going to offer a spiffy certificate.
And how did they obtain this?
So they're going to set up their own CA. They're going to generate a spiffy CA. They're going to generate certificates from it, and they're just going to publish their CA cert somewhere.
Is Google in fact going to do that?
I can't speak for them, but we've definitely spoken to them about it.
Well, I guess it seems to me a threshold question is that like some crawler, someone who runs a crawler should get up here and say they want to do this. I think that that should be a threshold question for like us standardizing this. Maybe 2 or 3 people.
I would also like that.
So I think I'd be more I'm more enthusiastic about this idea if that were to happen. And if that doesn't happen, I think we should. I'm sorry, but kind of like put it on pause.
I mean, some of them are in the room. Andre?
Andre Popov, Microsoft. I'm not hugely opposed to this idea. As an implementer of a general purpose TLS library, my difficulty will be how do I document, this would obviously be, if it's implemented, would be off by default. How do I document it in such a way that nobody uses it who shouldn't? Which is, the people who should be using this are an absolute minority. And, I would need to be very clear to make sure like the general purpose client should not be setting this.
I mean, you could just hide it behind the, if they haven't configured a client cert, don't have this option available.
I have a lot of client authentication going on, specifically with my library, because it's not so much browser oriented. Client auth is a very common case for us, but like documenting this clearly so that somebody doesn't accidentally enable this, that's.
So my theory would be it's if you're crawling the human-oriented web specifically.
Yeah. And also, I would, if the HTTP protocols did not prohibit the use of post and shake client auth, I would definitely say use post and shake client auth, but it's a problem.
Victor.
Yes. Sorry, I'm not facing the camera. This also has potential use in the email space for Dane, where a client might want to tell a server, I have a Dane-based certificate to share with you, but it needs the server to prompt the client to provide the certificate, which is not normally on. And in fact, tends to reduce interoperability if you start asking for certs, even for MTAs, because some of them do the wrong thing because they've never been tested with it. So I support this. It makes sense. It can be useful outside the web in, for example, MTA to MTA traffic, to selectively enable it between MTAs where the client says, yes, I'm ready for this.
Interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that use case. I think that's the end of the queue.
All right. I think we're done for today, right? And we'll see you on Thursday.
9:30 in the morning.
In the morning?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it was good.
At some point.